Michael Malice here. I want to tell you guys about our first sponsor to the show. It's at shavecleanmaintain.com. They bring you the barbershop experience at home. The company is called Le Barbier de Bourbon. I use it myself. I told them to send me the stuff so I can check it out. I'm currently holding in my little hands their aftershave and face lotion. It's called Soothe. It's sandalwood scented, so it smells sophisticated and expensive, but it's not. You'll have that nice smile all day long when you smell that grown-up scent. Throw that axe in the garbage. This is the stuff you want. It looks great on your shelf and leaves you feeling hydrated and your face nice and clean and squeaky smooth. They've got a whole line of stuff. They have shampoo, shaving stuff, whatever you want, they have it. Just go to shavecleanmaintain.com and use promo code You're Welcome for a great shaving experience. That's shavecleanmaintain.com, and you are welcome.
We do the show live every Tuesday at 12:30 Eastern. The show is free on SD Live. We put up the free episodes on Thursdays on iTunes and YouTube. But if you subscribe now at gasdigital.com, you get to watch in HD. You get the live chat so you can interact with us while we do the show. All episodes on demand, commercial free, and access to 15 other great shows. The promo code is YWMM for 20% off and a 14-day free trial. That's YWMM. You're welcome. Michael Malice. That is me.
The prime goal of government is to protect the minority of the opulent from the majority. And in order to do that, you've got to fragment the majority so they really can't get together and do very much. And you have to concentrate power in the wealth of the nation.
What's the use of a gun if you don't have your finger on the trigger? What's the use of a gun if you don't have your finger on?
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Malice, and let that be your welcome for the next hour. This is the summit everyone has been waiting for. We have got on the horn Scott Adams, creator of Dilbert, author of Win Bigly, Persuasion, a World Where Facts Don't Matter, as well as How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. I'm a huge fan of Scott's, and I'm really excited to have him on. We were probably the only two people who were calling this North Korea thing as it was happening.
Yeah, and it's about time that the two great leaders in the world got together here.
Well, one of the things I don't know if you know this about me, Scott. So Harvey Pekar of American Splendor fame had written a graphic novel about me. So is this the first time that you've been interviewed by an actual comic book character?
Yes, and actually, I'm very impressed that you were a character of his. That's you're going deep into the cartooning depths to come up with that name.
So let me talk to you a little bit about Dilbert. I mean, being a comic strip artist and writer, that's got to be a very solitary profession. Is there some sort of collegiality with your peers, or are you basically were you stuck in your cave churning out the product?
Cartooning is the weirdest profession because once a year there's a big event that's sort of like the Oscars for cartoonists, and most of the cartoonists who are working show up at that. But it's an actual convention of introverts.
Yeah.
It's the worst idea in the world. It's like people who choose to not work around other people. Let's put them all in one room and see what happens. So it's sort of an awkward time, but it's fun at the same time.
It sounds like the Libertarian Party.
I'm not sure I understand that, but I like it.
Well, my friend Kennedy described libertarians as people who are economically conservative and socially awkward.
Oh, okay. I accept that label.
So I wanted to talk to you first about this summit. What were you surprised by seeing, if anything?
I think you and I might have been the least surprised in this process. So starting over a year ago, I started blogging about how we were probably closer to a solution than nuclear war. And so when things started unfolding, we saw the two personalities doing what was probably the most predictable part of that was they put their personalities first and got together and got along, apparently.
Yeah, the thing I was surprised about was, I was on the interview with Breitbart last night, and maybe this is a Brooklyn thing. I'd like to hear your opinion because you're obviously written very extensively about Persuasion. When Trump was putting his hands on Kim Jong-un,
the person out, Joel Pollack from Breitbart, was saying, "Oh, this is a sign of friendship." To me, where I come from, that's a sign of dominance, not in a necessarily hostile way, but certainly a way of asserting your role. Is that how you saw it?
There's a right way and a wrong way to do it. If you looked at the specific way that Trump was touchy, it was sort of touchy as a business person,
Right.
and even at one point, almost like a fatherly kind of an embrace. So you're absolutely right. A certain amount of touching could be seen as aggressive, but the way he did it seemed to be more of embracing type of touching.
It seemed to me very much that his whole approach was that he was giving Kim Jong-un permission to do the right thing in a paternal but not paternalistic way. Is that how you read it as well?
He definitely seemed to be taking the lead, much like the experienced person in the room. Just, age means something. And the fact that Trump has done this for decades, I don't think is lost on Kim. And I think that there's some automatic respect that comes with age that played to just perfectly by being sort of the elder statesman in the room, making sure Kim was comfortable, making sure there weren't any gaps in the conversation. I thought he played it as well as you could play that situation.
I agree with that. And what I was most disturbed by was how the corporate press was reacting to this. And even though it was obviously very collegial, and let's suppose nothing comes of it theoretically, the reaction, the vitriol to me seemed mind-boggling. In fact, I was on Martha McCallum's show yesterday, and some woman was claiming that this wasn't Trump's accomplishment, this was Obama's.
That might be peak derangement syndrome. You can certainly see the argument when somebody says, well, President Obama got the economy in a good place and we're just seeing a continuation of it. Now, I think that's 75% true, but not 100% true. And that ratio will change in the next year or two and it becomes Trump's economy. But when you're talking about North Korea, I just don't see how you get to Obama set us up perfectly for this. That's a tough argument to make.
She was also making the case that Trump was doing everything in his power to undo Obama's legacy, and that's why he's doing this. And my point being, if you're going to liberate 25 million slaves out of spite, I'm fine with that. At a certain point, the motivation for doing the right thing is really irrelevant.
For those of us here in California, when those missile tests started to look like, hey, it looks like they can reach you pretty well with these nuclear weapons if they really want to. That's the point when I got pretty serious about, let's see if we can fix this. Let's not worry about the optics so much.
One of the things that I was very taken aback, I don't know how much the press feels the need to sensationalize as opposed to they're ignorant and don't know what they're saying. But when they were talking about, Kim Jong-un might nuke Anchorage or Guam, and the point I had to go on the shows and make is, if you're going to fire one missile, is it going to be Anchorage? I love Anchorage. God bless you people. But I mean, is that really the shot you're going to take?
That's I'm no military strategist, but if I know I'm going to be evaporated 20 minutes after I launch that missile, I'm going to make it count. And no offense to the fine people in Anchorage, but that's not exactly your best target right there.
So did you actually study North Korea specifically, or did you come to these same conclusions simply due to your ability to understand how people operate?
Entirely based on people operate. So there's some universals about what people want, what influences people noticing opportunities. And so there was a whole bunch of stuff that seemed to be lining up in the same direction if we recognized it. And it seemed to me that in what I'm calling the golden age, we're in a period where we're starting to recognize that some of our largest problems are no longer physical. A physical problem would be you don't have enough resources. There's a physical disaster. Those still exist. But for things like North Korea, the only problem was the way we were thinking about it and the way they were thinking about how we were thinking about it and how we imagined we could read the mind of the other and there was bad stuff in there.
Yeah.
Now, there may have been some bad stuff in there, but the point is that this was a psychological problem that for the first time we had two people who I think we can safely say understand persuasion. These are two people who were born to it and have done it for long enough that they recognized it in the other. And I think they saw the opportunity in the other. And that was probably the big breakthrough.
Yeah, when I first started working in this space around 6 years ago, what I made it my point to change was this perception that North Korea is crazy. And what I realized doing my research is to say that someone or some entity is crazy is synonymous with saying, I don't understand them. And now, thankfully, for the most part, there's been an increasing understanding, especially on the right, on the anti-war right, that they are perfectly rational actors, though, morally depraved.
Yeah, I was at the same point saying, isn't it always true that when we have an enemy who might be a military enemy or is a military enemy, when was the last time we didn't call them crazy?
Right.
If you call everybody who's this type of enemy crazy, it starts to lose its meaning, and you have to ask yourself, is it a coincidence? Are they actually crazy? Because that's also a possibility, right? They're all crazy.
Right.
But when you looked at North Korea's actions, you just couldn't find the crazy, because everything that Kim did up to this point, and including the summit, looks as rational as anything ever looked to me. I can't see the crazy in that at all.
Yeah, I remember, after 9/11 and to suggest that we should read what Osama bin Laden said and understand where he's coming from was regarded as somehow validating his approach and his worldview. And the point I made at the time is like, look, if you think Eisenhower didn't study Hitler and Rommel and all these other people and how they're going to operate, it's very weird, this, kind of cliche that if you kind of understand what someone is trying to say to you, that somehow you are giving them the stamp of approval of their worldview.
Yeah, we were trapped in this psychological prison, if you will, in which we first of all imagined that the past would predict the future, which really is just an illusion. The past never repeats because it can't. All the things that were true in the past can never be also true the same way in the future. If you take North Korea, for example, the fact that in previous arrangements there was no follow through, so there were just words that they didn't stick to, that changes the present. So we can never have a situation where we got surprised twice before. Right. That can never happen. So the administration is quite clearly taking that as their lesson to how to do this one right. And a lot of things like the other leader is crazy, that's stopping us, or we can't have a meeting with him because that would be giving them something that, before we've gotten something. All of those things were not as important as we imagined that they were. And it took somebody like a Trump to say, how about I just shake the box?
Yeah.
How about if we just say all the things that we did before that didn't work, why don't we consider doing something different? And then he did.
Yeah. One of the things that I want to hear you talk about with your successful career is when you talk about how to fail at almost everything, right? For me, when things aren't working, I have enough, I don't know if it's humility or whatever the word would be, to be like, all right, my approach is not getting me the outcome I want. Let me try something new, even though it makes no sense on some level, at very least for A/B testing, right? And I think so many people who succeed by constantly failing and using that failure as data, whereas people in the government, State Department, their only approach is, well, what we've been doing hasn't worked, but we have to keep doing what hasn't worked because the alternative is somehow bad or illegitimate.
Yeah, and most of the reasoning about what will work and what's the reasonable way to do it is based on what somebody else has done that either worked before or didn't work before. But once you break free of the model that the past determines what the future looks like, you have a lot more options. Now, it is true that people are very similar. So people will act like people today and tomorrow and the next day, but the situation is always new. There are always more variables. And I think that one of the big variables was even the discussion of reunification. Yeah. I mean, think how that changed the framework from two countries or three countries, depending how you're counting them, at war with each other, to, we're on a path to reunification. What would be the point of nuclear weapons in that situation? Right. So it changed the point of having nuclear weapons. We didn't see that before.
Yeah, Nebraska's never going to nuke Ohio. and so on and so forth. And North Korea is very much obsessed with reunification. When you are in North Korea, the maps of the Korean Peninsula is always a unified Korea. Their slogan is Korea is one. And when they write North and South Korea, it's always lowercase n and lowercase s, because from their perspective, these are two regions of one indivisible country. So if you want to feed into that in order to get them to a peaceful resolution, that's great.
Yeah, and the beauty is that there's no timetable for that. So you can say aspirationally, we would like to be one, but that could be 100 years, or it could be 5 years, or there could be a whole string of events that get us to wherever we feel comfortable being. And it looks like that's the path they're on. A little bit of sports stuff, a little bit of travel, a little bit of more communication, and it's all stuff that you could change if you needed. Nobody's too committed. But at some point, both sides, North and South Korea, are going to be a little bit pregnant, and it's just going to be easier to be something like one country eventually.
Here's the issue I've been grappling with in this context. When you liberalize a dictatorship and the population discovers that the dictator has been oppressive for years, has been lying to the population for years, that often has extremely bad consequences for the people at the top. Saddam Hussein, Ceausescu is the textbook example in Romania, Gaddafi's Libya. Do you think it's possible for it's funny, I was on Fox yesterday and I said, look, it's very difficult once you take your hand off the wheel as a dictator, to not have the dominoes fall and basically have your entire regime collapse. And the woman who was interviewing me said, well, no one's talking about regime collapse. I'm like, well, I am. It was such a very odd comment from her part. But that's the question I have for you. Like, I know there has to be concern fairly for Kim Jong-un that he's personally going to get murdered should they liberalize. How do you address that?
Yeah, it's a big risk. And the models that I like to put in people's minds, just so they have the positive model in their mind, is Great Britain and the royal family. And it seems to me that there's a promotion that Kim could get. He's the leader of a small, impoverished country, but he's on the verge of being a global player of great historic importance, whose actions could actually ripple through other situations in the future. But if, for example, he decided to be, let's say, a founding father of reunification,
right?
Again, no matter how long it takes, and part of that deal is he keeps power, but there's some kind of slow transition to technocrats or bureaucrats or whatever,
like Pinochet,
until he's more of a founder, godlike figure who has a certain portfolio. Maybe his portfolio is, rainmaker for North Korea. He's bringing in the business. And this is all, what's important here is that, of course, there's the folks who will accuse him of being a brutal dictator or things he's done in the past. But we need to be able to rehabilitate him. We need to be able to say, we can let go of that and we'll help you thrive in that, as long as you're doing the right thing for your people and for us in South Korea, we'll help you thrive, even though the past is pretty rugged.
So I can see the case being made that, he frees the camps, and even though he was the one who ran the camps, he gets to be the one who freed them.
Yeah. And I don't think we can totally understand how North Korean people will regard any of this, because I don't think we can get into the mindset of how little they understand about the larger situation. So it's sort of like I always think about if you were to find a frozen cave person and you somehow could revive them and they came awake for the first time in the year 2018, how would you explain automobiles? How do you explain anything? So I think the North Koreans may be a little bit closer to a blank slate than people who can't change the way that they need to change. So you're right. They may see being let out of jail as a wonderful thing. They may see it. It's possible that that may actually be the most problematic part, is what do you do with the people who are currently incarcerated.
Yeah, and in 2001, Kim Jong-il met with the Japanese prime minister, and this was, and I want to hear your take on his powers of persuasion in this context. For decades, there had been rumors that North Korea had been kidnapping Japanese citizens at random, and since these citizens had nothing to do with each other, and they weren't powerful people at all, it was teenagers, young men, young women, taken from the beaches and the malls, and many people in the West said this was proof of how crazy everyone regarded the anti-North Korean propaganda. Why would they do this? It makes no sense. In 2001, Kim Jong-il admitted it. And he said, yeah, we've been doing this for years. I'm sorry, but it was a subordinate of mine who was punished. They were overzealous. The Japanese reaction was violent and very hostile, and it did not end the way Kim Jong-il wanted. Do you think that would be a mechanism for Kim Jong-un to say, look, this is the infrastructure I inherited, and it's my job to basically transition it towards a more positive one?
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity for him to do what I would call pacing and leading, which is agreeing with the people who have the complaint and agreeing with them harder than they agree with themselves, which is to say, yeah, I came into this system. It's horrible. You got to work with me to make sure stuff like this doesn't happen. So, and I'm also thinking that in terms of the Otto Warmbier situation, because it seems unlikely, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this. It seems unlikely to me that the order to brutalize him came from the top, like the very top. It seems far more likely, and this is the opinion I'd like from you, is that it's just how the jails work.
Well, actually, what I heard,
they're just brutal places.
What I heard is, first of all, when Otto Warmbier came back, in that shape, I was very taken aback for the simple reason that North Korea treats their hostages relatively well. And the point I made is, in North Korea, you don't end up in a coma, you end up in a coffin. You don't have that life support system there, even for the people at the very top. And his family said he came back all mangled and this and that. And I was very surprised at this. I stayed in the same hotel as him. He might have even, same floor. He might have even stayed in the same room as me. The coroners or the medical examiner, I don't remember who it was, that same day said that the parents were being deceptive, that they saw no proof that he was all mangled up. So there is a huge disconnect, and this has not been reported heavily. And I was very surprised to see how this was swept under the rug. They said he wasn't, all like his teeth being messed up. That was not the case. So what I think, if I had to guess, that this was a case of self-harm.
Oh, trying to kill himself, but I don't know how you do that by bludgeoning yourself.
I don't know that it could have been some kind of hanging or some kind of something like that. The fact is, they obviously, and I'm sure you agree, they didn't want him to die on their soil because that would benefit them nothing. And this has had enormously negative consequences for them.
Yeah, there's no incentive for the people at the top to actually say, yeah, let's brutalize this guy. It wouldn't make sense under any scenario I can imagine. But if you imagine that he was at any time with other prisoners, if you imagine he ever talked back, or the prison keepers felt he was being, disobeying any minor rule, because we know, unfortunately, he broke a very minor rule, which is what got him into that. Yes. Is it likely that once in jail, he then followed every rule, especially given the language difference? My guess is there was a jailer who probably was a little overzealous there.
That's certainly plausible as well. One thing I would disagree with, I think it's very, very unlikely he would have had contact with other prisoners, because they very much want to keep their population isolated from knowledge of the outside world. And in fact, I think if it's not illegal, it's at least very heavily frowned upon to have any sort of contact with foreigners. There's a biography I read of someone who was a translator who worked in North Korea. I think he was from Britain. And at one point he sat down on a bench next to a woman in Pyongyang and just said hello to her. And she saw him, a Westerner, and screamed and ran. So the xenophobia there is very, very heavy. And they certainly wouldn't want prisoners to be the ones who are speaking to a Westerner. And in fact, I think it was Kenneth Bay, I don't remember if it was him exactly, was saying that while he was being kept prisoner, the guards would ask him many questions about, how much money he made, how much his watch cost the outside world, because they had that little concept. And in fact, I had that same experience with my two guides. You know, they were very curious about the outside world. And it was kind of interesting because she had the perception that she was informed. Because when I asked her about 9/11, she said, well, of course we knew about that. It was on all our televisions. But when I asked her about the Holocaust, she only had a vague idea. And the example I used in my Reason article about this, she had never heard of what a scorpion was. So they have the perception that they are getting, especially in Pyongyang where you're cosmopolitan, a fair amount of knowledge of the outside world, but in fact, it's Plato's cave to the nth degree.
Yeah, and I think Kim knows and has known that there's no way that the regime lasts in the age of the internet, because they either have to doom themselves to a world that is not connected, which, you know, if you play it into the future, they'd actually go a separate evolutionary path, literally. I mean, that's the 50,000 year view. But there was no way that North Korea could survive the internet.
Right.
So, and in all the various ways that we could get communication in one way or the other. So the timer has always been ticking, regardless of what anybody did militarily. So he's doing the right thing at the right time, which also gives me confidence that he's a rational and strategic player, which is good for us.
You got a friend of mine. I want me to ask you this. You got into it yesterday with Tom Nichols pretty heavily on Twitter. Which you seem to get into these Twitter wars every so often. But what I love about how when you do it is you're so matter of fact and blasé about it as you're destroying these people. It seems effortless on your part. Is this something you've always been good at?
Well, keep in mind what I call the two movies on one screen. Yeah. What you described as me, eviscerating somebody on Twitter, I guarantee you, if you looked at the Twitter feeds of the people on the other side, they would say, "Man, Tom Nichols just destroyed that idiot. I can't believe he even shows his face on Twitter." So the first thing we have to recognize is that people didn't see it the same. But the specific thing I was doing there was the question of Canadian trade with the U.S. And I was asking, why is it that the press has not simply laid out what they do to us, we do to them, do the math, okay, milk is small, but it's a big percentage tariff. Do the math, who's got a worse or best deal? And so I was simply asking for that. And what I knew in advance is that people would say they've already seen it. Right. And then I would say, great, I'd love to see it too. Could you send me the link? And then person after person after person, and you saw this play out live on Twitter, would send me a link that was not what I was asking for. It would be maybe one element of it, such as trade wars are bad. Yeah, and I'd say, great, that's the part everybody agrees with. Even President Trump says, if you don't need to have a trade war, it would be bad. Okay, so that everybody goes on. Now show me the rest of the argument where somebody put just Canada. Just keep it simple. We'll just talk Canada. That's the easy one, right? Just tell us what they do, what we do. I'll look at it on one page. I'll decide. And then people would get madder and madder because they believed they had seen somehow enough for them to know the situation. And it was unambiguously true that they had not seen enough to understand the situation, but that didn't change their level of certainty about whether it was either fair or unfair, or the president was crazy or strategic. And so person after person was getting triggered yesterday, and I was sort of relentless. This is probably the part that caught your attention. I decided to see how far I could take it and how long I could push people to realize that they didn't know anything about the situation, and yet they had very firm opinions about what was fair or unfair, et cetera. And Tom Nichols went immediately personal and imagined I was thinking things, and imagined I had plans, and imagined I didn't understand things that I do. And then the other thing that's fun is that when I get into a conversation about trade, people immediately say, and I have to do my impression of a character that I like to call Dale.
Okay.
They come on and they say some version of, "Oh, a cartoonist. What does a cartoonist know about international trade?" Scott, good one, Scott. You know all about trade and economics because you write some cartoons. And then I respond back, well, I do have a degree in economics and an MBA from a top business school. And I worked in business for years. I've negotiated for years. And the response I'll get from that goes like this. Yeah, well, President Trump is a con man and a racist, and he lies all the time. How about that?
Touche.
So that's what I call the laundry list tell for cognitive dissonance. So if the topic is North Korea or the topic is trade, and the person on Twitter comes after you, well, what about these 5 quality flaws that the president has? That has nothing to do with the conversation. That usually means you've hit the target.
One of my first jobs before I became an author was working at Goldman Sachs, and my contempt for corporate culture could not be overstated. Now, Dilbert is kind of somewhat tongue-in-cheek. I mean, because the viciousness in some cases is mitigated by the fact that it's humorous. I think a lot of people don't realize how hard you're hitting that scene. How would you describe your perception of corporate culture in terms of, I mean, is it skeptical, contemptuous, bemused?
Well, I spent 16 years in cubicles in the corporate world, so I lived it. And so I write mostly about my lived experience, which is the complete, soul-crushing feeling of having a boss and working in literally a little box. Yeah. I worked in a gray cubicle in a sea of gray cubicles, and the biggest memory I have of those experiences is that no matter what I didn't make any difference. Like the company was exactly the same, whether I did a good job, I worked on A or I worked on B. It was just a complete meaningless experience, which was frustrating and soul crushing. So I'm glad I got out.
But do you think it attracts a certain type of personality? I remember when I was there, I had a colleague and she had something called, I forget the term, but the colloquialism is racket nail. And it's a mutation where your thumbnail is wider than it is tall. And I said, oh, you're a mutant. You have this racket nail. And she was so offended and she would bring it up to other people as if this is some kind of slur. And this is not a stupid woman. I mean, she's working at Goldman Sachs. And that to me was like, there's this Russian term which translates as wooden, and talking to someone and there's no one there. And I find that kind of thing terrifying.
Well, if I could give you one advice for the rest of your life, people don't like to be called mutants. It never goes over as well as you think it should.
Well, I learned that.
So, yeah, the problem is that in your mind, you're thinking, oh, this means nothing, but people receive it completely differently.
Yeah, I mean, I have webbed toes. I'm a mutant just as much as anybody else. But it's also so odd to me how, I don't like using the word bourgeois, but I will. But there's this kind of mindset. I remember when I was there, I didn't want to work overtime. The job was very stressful, and I wanted to go home and I wanted to write. And they would make the point that 2 points they would make. One is, well, we're paying you for overtime and we're time and a half. And the idea that I would rather have my spare time than their time and a half in money made no sense to them. It was literally like I was talking gibberish. And the second point, which they couldn't understand, was when my boss would say, I'm not asking you to do anything that I'm not doing. And to me, it's like, okay, if you have more time to dedicate to the company, that's wonderful. And that is your choice. But I have different priorities and values, and they could not wrap their heads around this. This must have been similar to what you were dealing with for years.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's so much a couldn't as choose not to. I've often said that leadership is just a special name for evil, because the whole point of leadership is that you're getting people to do things that they wouldn't want to do on their own. Because you don't need to lead somebody to eat a cookie. If you say, I got a delicious cookie, would you like to eat this? People will say, no, I would need a little more leadership before I eat that cookie. They don't say that, they eat the cookie. Right. But if you say, I'd like you to work overtime in a way that will be bad for your health, your happiness, and your well-being, but we think that would be good for other people.
Right.
All right, that's something you weren't going to do on your own. You might have said, I like other people, but sometimes I got to do my own thing as well. So leadership is usually trying to cloak the fact that you're being asked to do something that's better for somebody else than for you. You hope in some indirect way the company does well, the stockholders do well, and then you get a raise too. But because of the indirectness of it and the fact that sometimes it's not true, you're being asked to do something that is not your nature, not your first choice, maybe not even your best interest. So the fact that any leaders in a company act as though they think that's the only way to think may be a little bit masking the fact that they know they're asking you to do something that's better for them than it is for you.
It's interesting you said that, because the preface to my book, Dear Reader, was a quote from Isabel Patterson from 1943, and I'm going to get it slightly wrong, but she had said, whenever the word leader or leadership returns to common usage, it always connotes a return to barbarism. And then the end of the quote was, for a civilized people, it is the most ominous word in any language. And I had remembered reading that in college. And when writing about the dear leader, Kim Jong-il, I was so glad I had that exact quote. So that's very interesting. You had the same conclusion, that leadership is just another word for evil.
But the good news is, and here's something I've been talking about at length, that because of the rise of social media and because our systems, our leaders require, it's necessary for them to at least be compatible with the will of the majority of the people, or else they don't get to be leaders very long. So in this world, there can be persuasive citizens who can know a lot on a topic, and I would say you're one of them. In fact, you're actually one of the best examples of it. So in the topic of North Korea, because you had an expertise, you communicate well, you're persuasive, and you can get an audience because of social media tools, you suddenly become sort of a leader in a way that the leaders have to follow. So we're kind of reaching this inversion point where in the old days you had to have the leader make the decisions, tell you what to do, and hope everybody's okay with that. And we're watching that turned upside down with a populist president.
Yeah.
Right now, President Trump is very compatible with at least the supermajority of Republicans, and would like to expand that to be compatible with all people. That takes a little persuasion, et cetera. But you can see in real time the number of times he's changed his approach, and based on things you've seen from influential people. Somebody said something on Fox News, somebody did an interview, there's a podcast, there's a tweet. You can see these things influencing the way he approaches things in real time. And I think that is the world you want to live in. So that's a pretty good trend for the future.
My friend Michael had a question for you. He wanted to know, what would it take for President Trump to do for you to say, okay, I've been wrong about him. He's actually not as persuasive as I thought he was.
Well, it's going to be hard to judge on any individual case,
okay,
because persuasion is like many things. It's not like I like to use the analogy of Michael Jordan or Stephen Curry. They miss half of their shots,
right,
but they can still be the greatest basketball player of all time. So if you look at any individual case and you say, wow, it looks like President Trump really missed a shot on that one, I'm willing to say he missed a shot, and I'll give you some examples. He was supportive of Southern statues, the Confederacy statues. In my opinion, that was a layup to say, I think the state should figure this out. To me, it does seem offensive.
Okay.
Right, so to me, that was just money left on the table. He could have agreed with everybody. He said, look, it's a local matter, but if you ask me, I get why this is offensive to some people. Simple. I think in healthcare, there's a whole lot left on the table. I think DACA, that's not working out the way anybody wants it to work out at the moment. Now, all those things I think can go in the right direction, and I think I would expect more likely that they will. But if you ask me what things would I criticize in terms of his persuasiveness, those are the top of the list: immigration, healthcare, Confederate statues, and race relationship, which I think he's turning around in a substantial way. Not enough, but you're seeing a lot of progress to show a more inclusive world. You hear stuff about prison reform. You see more pardons of people who are black and brown that didn't need to happen.
Right.
These were things that are completely optional, and they violate the so-called secret racist whistle that some people imagine they're hearing. Because you wouldn't do those things. You wouldn't issue the pardons that just didn't need to be issued. If you were trying to protect some imaginary base of racists that would hate that sort of thing.
Why do you think it's gotten to the point with so many in the left where it's Robert De Niro screaming "fuck Trump," Samantha Bee calling Ivanka Trump a feckless cunt. It's the most vulgar and kind of histrionic language, which I don't think we've seen before. Why do you think they're acting in this way?
Well, there's a little bit of a perceptual thing. I'm pretty sure if you mind the Twitter feeds of Republicans during Obama's era, that you'd find just horrible,
Oh, sure.
horrible things.
Of course.
So let's first of all say that this is a universal thing, and that you might notice it more based on who's on power. You know, which Twitter feeds you spend the most time on, and who's in power. So some of it is just what you tend to notice. But it does seem to me, and this is purely subjective, I have no data to back up what I'm going to say. This is just a feel for someone who spends a ton of time on social media. And the feeling is that we're having the second big, what I'd call a cluster bomb of cognitive dissonance.
Okay.
The first one happened on election night,
Oh, yeah.
when the people who thought they were the smartest people in the country realized they got the single most basic prediction of what's going to happen on election night wrong, and it caused them to imagine all kinds of reasons for it, and there were dozens of reasons people mentioned as like, well, it happened because of Russia, it happened because of sexism, racism, whatever, and as the president performs and does things that people like, the economy is on track, the ISIS caliphate is no more in terms of a geographic entity, and now we see North Korea. And if things continue to go in the right direction in North Korea, it will be one of the most singularly impressive achievements of any president.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's going to be in the
Easily.
in the historical annals of great acts if it works out. And I think people see that coming because it looks like it is coming, and they're having that second wave of this can't be real, and they're having an emotional reaction that is essentially the difference between how they imagined the world with a president who couldn't get anything right, to living in a world where he got the hardest thing right. And I've got a feeling Iran is next. I have a feeling there are some good things coming in the Middle East, which it would be of course the hardest nut to crack after North Korea.
And he said this himself. He goes, this would be the toughest negotiation conceivable. He said it's freely during the campaign. What did you think of Hillary and her powers of persuasion, as a candidate?
I thought Hillary had the worst individual powers of persuasion I've ever seen, to the point where a running joke among Trump supporters, and I started this, was that they had a mole doing their tweeting and their commercials. And the idea was that there was some Trump supporter pretending to be a Hillary supporter who was intentionally doing bad tweets for her and bad commercials. So, for example, one of the just classically bad things that she would do is she ran a series of tweets in which she would say, "Imagine a President Trump" in the body of the tweet, and then it would be a link to something that, if you clicked it, would show something bad could happen if you had a President Trump. But of course, the big problem that Trump was trying to solve was, can you even imagine a President Trump?
Right.
And she really helped us imagine that. And most people don't click the link, so all they see is Clinton say, "Hey, imagine President Trump," and
Okay.
we did.
Yeah.
So that's and let me give you my favorite example of that was that both candidates appeared on Saturday Night Live. President Trump, of course, they have to approve any skit they're in at that level. They approve the skit. President Trump approved the skit, or candidate Trump approved the skit in which he was shown as president in the White House, so that we could imagine him being president. Whereas Hillary Clinton imagined, or she approved the skit in which she was a drunk at a bar.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was her skit. Now, they both had control.
Yeah.
They could have said no, but that's what you got.
She did an interview once with Charlemagne, and he's black and his co-host, and she was talking about how she travels with hot sauce with her, and he says to her, "Oh, are you just trying to pander to black people?" And they all burst out laughing, and she said, "Is it working?" And I was sitting there and I was just flummoxed that this woman, after decades in politics, would be so tone deaf. And the point I made repeatedly on Fox is we're talking about someone who almost lost the nomination to a person who wasn't even in their party, which should be technically impossible.
Uh, so you saw recently, I think it was today or yesterday, uh, President Trump was saying that if things went badly with North Korea, he'd probably deny that anything went badly, and then everybody laughed because
Right.
they know that that's part of his personality. But he got away because he has a good sense of humor. And a good sense of humor, protects a lot of messages that would otherwise be dangerous. The example you gave with Hillary, she has a notoriously not good sense of humor, and I don't mean that as any kind of personal insult. Not everybody has, the timing and the sense of humor, and she didn't. And so, what should have been a joke and we should have just laughed at became more than that because it landed with a thud. So, I think President Trump could have probably delivered some version of that same line, and people would have said, "Oh, I get it. That's pretty funny. You just bring the hot sauce because, you're just persuading."
And what's interesting though is she's was so convinced of her own brilliance, and I'm thinking specifically of the second debate where she said it's a good thing that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump doesn't have control of the law in this country, and she gave him this look, and he just goes, "Yeah, you'd be in jail." And it's like, look, if you know he's good with the one-liners, and that's not your forte, which is fine, you're a policy person, why are you setting him up? That's what I didn't get. Like,
Yeah.
we all have weaknesses. You have weaknesses. I have weaknesses. If you're smart, you work around them rather than just ignoring them.
To be fair, I don't think I would have seen that coming either, because you don't really expect Trump to go that far out of the approved box, even as many times as you've seen him leave the box.
Okay.
He doesn't like being in the box, but you wouldn't expect him to be in a debate, say, if I were president, you'd go to jail, even as a joke, and it was a joke. But there's something about, good pitching beats good hitting, and good hitting beats, good pitching. So
Who do you think of journalists consistently doesn't get it the most?
it's hard to know how many people are being serious.
Okay.
This is tough. So if you look at, for example, Chris Cillizza at CNN, he writes and appears on the network a lot. When I read his stuff, I can't tell if he just got the assignment to say bad things about Trump and this is his piece for today, or if he believes the things he's saying. I just can't tell. My guess is that he's talked himself into it all being legitimate. Maggie Haberman is another one. When I see her tweets, sometimes I look at them and I go, do you know that this is just clearly biased and looks that way to everyone? Or is this an actual legitimate expression of inner opinion? I always caution people to avoid mind reading.
Okay.
It would be easy for me to say, oh yeah, they know they're doing it. Or for me to say, oh no, they know that they don't know they're doing it. But I think the fair thing to say is you can't tell.
Right.
And I try to caution people, if you can't tell, that should be your conclusion. You can't tell.
I'm concluding Steven Pinker's new book, Enlightenment Now, right now. And one of the points he makes is just because people have all these cognitive biases doesn't mean that politics have to be essentially irrational. I disagree with him. What do you think?
Well, he's got a great, let's say, goal. In a perfect world, we would make rational decisions. But the problem is we don't have those tools. Humans are not, we did not evolve in a way that would allow us to use rationality in the direct way that we would like. So instead, we do the best we can, and we imagine that we're being rational, and we imagine the people on the other side are not. In reality, probably both sides are irrational in different ways. They both choose their facts. So if you said, hey, from now on, we're going to stop being, biased, and we're going to stop using propaganda and influence, and we're just going to stick with the facts. And then the other side says, that's great. This is what I've longed for so long. Facts. All right, you go first. And the first person says, well, let's take the fact that Canada is treating us unfair on trade. And the other person says, no, they're not. And where are you?
Right.
That is the end of the conversation.
And
so literally nothing would ever happen if people stuck to facts. You need somebody to push through it and say, okay, we don't even know what the facts are, but let me tell you something I do know. If I can get a better with Canada, that's good for the United States. That's what they hired me for. That's what we know. All right. As far as the ins and outs, whose tariff is more, what's the big dollar amounts, what's the small, who's being subsidized, how do you calculate Canada's healthcare, value that all of their producers get for free? How do you net all this out? And the answer is we can't. It's way too complicated, and nobody's explaining it to us in any way we can understand. But we can go up a level and say, given this big confusing mess of who knows what's happening with trade, does it make sense for the person who you've hired, in this case, Trump, the person hired to get you good deals, does it make sense for him to push on that, given that we don't know exactly who's unfair to whom? And the answer is yes. That is the most rational thing you could do, is if there's uncertainty about who's being fair and who isn't, you should absolutely push on that and see if you can get a little more.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you're seeing.
What did you think of that CNN campaign where they said this is an apple and basically tried to present themselves as arbiters of truth? So not only is it just, to me, ominous, any organization that proclaims itself to be the truth, but it's also kind of bizarre given how strong, there's, to paraphrase Margaret Thatcher, being truthful is like being a lady. If you have to tell people you aren't.
Yeah, it looked like a play from weakness, because if you're a news organization and you have to remind your customers that sometimes you tell the truth, or in this case, they're trying to tell us they do tell the truth, it doesn't sound as convincing as it ought to be, right? That should have been an assumption that we all went in there with. But moreover, it has the problem that it's so easily mockable and so easily memeable. So if you don't know that you're creating something easily mockable and memeable, you've missed maybe the most important thing. I would imagine that the people who already believed CNN was telling the truth bought that and said, oh yeah, we got the apples, you guys got the bananas. And I think that 100% of the people who thought they don't tell the truth just said, ha, 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 apples, bananas, good try. That didn't work. So, and the other caution I would give, and this is for all of your listeners, if you're tempted to brand somebody with a nickname or to say that they use, for example, fake news, make sure that the person you're trying to brand that way is not the world's best brander, because he's going to snatch that hand and turn it around. And that's what President Trump did. He didn't invent fake news, but he owns it. He owns it now.
Yeah, as someone who enjoys being vitriolic on television and being nasty to politicians, when they started that whole Dangerous Donald campaign, I was just absolutely baffled. I'm like, do you really think this is going to work?
Yeah, that was one of the best examples of bad persuasion out of the Clinton campaign, because here were in the end 60 million supporters of the president. I'm not sure how many voted, but they were voting for somebody dangerous. That was the propositions.
Right.
So essentially, they were amplifying the benefit people expected to get from him.
Oh, here's the question I just thought of. Do you think if you had sat down and coached Hillary, do you think you could have gotten her to pull out a win? Yeah. I mean, she had the numbers.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, she did have
so.
the majority. It was just distributed poorly.
Right. But she could have had more of a majority and enough to win those other states without spending the time there. Yeah, she had. And I'll tell you the first thing I would have said: stop saying that being a woman is an advantage.
Yeah.
Stop saying that. That was probably her single biggest problem. And if you remember I often say good things about President Obama, especially with Persuasion. He was really good on that point. So he wasn't hiding the fact that he, had African American heritage. Is that the right way to say it? He was. I don't know what's polite anymore.
Is that a dog whistle? Do I hear a dog whistle?
Yeah. But he wasn't promoting that as an advantage. He was not saying, "Hey, world, it's time for a black guy to be president." Right. And by not saying that, it was perfect persuasion, because the people on the right who might have had some reason to, resent him for that, just said, "Okay, this is exactly the black guy that we want to get behind. We want to get behind the guy who says it's about my policies, it's about my capability, let me prove it with actions, etc. That was somebody you could get behind. But as soon as Hillary said, yeah, being a woman is an advantage and it's time, a lot of men just said, oh, that's not the message we want to be promoted, that men have lower value, don't listen as well, which she said directly.
Right.
And that somehow we're less qualified at the moment to be president.
So a lot of times you and I have the same situation on Twitter where someone will come after me and it'll be like, you're an idiot or fuck you or you're this or you're a Nazi. And to me, it's water off a duck's back. I mean, it's completely irrelevant. This person is just reacting emotively and it has no bearing whatsoever. Are there any things on Twitter that do actually get under your skin?
Well, here's an interesting observation, which I'll invite as many people as can verify this as possible. It is very rare for someone who disagrees with me on Twitter or anywhere else to actually disagree with what actual opinion is. What I get is people disagreeing with some hallucination of the bad version of what I said. And that is so consistent. It's close to, if I had to put a number, maybe 95% of all the criticism I've gotten in my adult life is by somebody misunderstanding what I said and then criticizing the misunderstanding. So once you realize that that's what's happening, it can be frustrating because you're like, oh, I don't want that hanging out there that somebody thinks I said that bad version, so I have to correct it. So there's a little bit of work involved, and that it bothers me that I have to work to put out the right version.
Right.
But at the same time, it's also fun, and I refer to my critics as fuel, because every time I get criticized in a way that makes me respond, my energy actually goes up.
Right.
And I feel like I get something out of that, even if it's just the exchange and I learned something about how people respond to this message. Maybe they made a criticism that actually was pretty good, and I think, whoa, I hadn't heard that before. So I tend to look at it pretty positively. It's just fuel.
What are you proudest of with regard to the long run that Dilbert had?
Well, I'm not proud specifically about how long it's lasted, because comics have that strange quality that once they become popular, it's almost impossible to get them out of newspapers.
Okay.
And even though newspapers are smaller, the internet's the same effect. I would say what I'm most proud of is that I gave up all artistic integrity. And what I mean by that is that Dilbert started as a cartoon that I drew because they were jokes that I liked personally.
Okay.
And it didn't take off for a few years. And then when I listened to my reader, and they said, oh, put him in the office more, because he wasn't in the office that much in the beginning.
Okay.
Said, make it an office-based strip, and we love it. Those are the ones we cut out. So an artist would have said, no. You don't understand, public.
Right.
I know you're paying for this and you're reading it.
Right.
But let me tell you what you need to see. That's how the artist approaches it. Right. Now, my background is not art; it's business. As I mentioned, business school, etc. And so when the customers very consistently said, "Yeah, we like it better when you do this," I changed it. I changed the property. So I am most proud of the fact that I gave my customers what they wanted and clearly expressed, and did not let my artistic integrity get in the way.
Why does Dilbert like lasagna so much?
Yeah, that's for those listening who don't understand the reference. You probably do understand the reference to Garfield, who likes lasagna, but it's I guess the insult I hear the most on Twitter. People say, "Oh yeah, Garfield loves lasagna," because they're pretending I'm the other cartoonist,
right.
Jim Davis, who does Garfield.
I am convinced. I don't have a writing background. You weren't taught to be a cartoonist. That anyone can become a decent writer, at the very least. If there's certain things that if you just do A, B, and C, you will be competent. And if you're competent, you're at the 80th percentile. What few tips could you give people to become more persuasive in their day-to-day lives?
Well, I would say the biggest persuasive tools would be the following. Visual imagery is very persuasive. So even if you're describing something, you don't want to say, oh, the woods are dangerous. You want to say, there was a guy who got mauled to death by a bear last year. He ripped his arms off and people found him chewing on a leg. So you want to make things visual. That's very important. Your biggest motivators are fear. Now, fear was a big part of the political campaign, but in your day-to-day life, there aren't that many opportunities to use fear as a motivator. And it's tricky. You don't want to be scaring people, for no good reason. So in your personal life, use aspirations. Try to describe the better version of people. Take them to the higher level, what I call the high ground. So get them out of the weeds of disagreeing and up to a level where they understand there's a system for how to talk about things and they're looking at the big picture. So try to take them to the big picture as much as possible. And then also use what I call pacing and leading, which is listening to their point of view, repeating it back to make sure that they understand it, and even reinforcing it as long as you can until they feel, oh yeah, this person is really on the same track, where our minds work alike. And then, as any hypnotist or persuader will tell you, once you have them on the same track, let's say they're in the car with you, then they'll say, hey, why don't you drive for a while? And then they'll go with you. But if you start with, you're wrong, let me tell you why you're wrong, the defenses go up. That's the end of the conversation.
I could not agree with you more. One of the things I had to learn, and which is very useful to me, is telling someone, sometimes even explicitly, I get where you're coming from and your feelings are valid, and here's why you're feeling this way. And once people feel understood, there's instantly a level of trust. And the opposite of that I've seen is like if someone's complaining about, let's say, racism, and the conservative response would be like, I'm against racism too, but you're not validating their frame of reference, and right away that conversation is going to go nowhere. And in this context, what did you think? You were talking about taking them out of the weeds. What did you think of that video Trump showed Kim Jong-un? I'm sure you've seen it. It's like 4 minutes long. It sounds like exactly what you were just talking about.
Yeah, that video I called out as maybe one of the best diplomatic moves anybody ever made. And in this case, it's not manipulative because it's persuading toward a win-win where Kim gets, a prosperous, healthy country and everybody's happy, and we get, denuclearization. So it's great persuasion. It's visual. It uses the process of contrast where it shows stark images of, could be war, or it could be, look at these skyscrapers and technology and great things you could have. So that's good persuasion to keep it visual and keep that contrast. And almost everything about that was on point with good persuasion, including, and this was very important, you heard Kim himself at the beginning of the get-together say a version of, let's not be limited by the past. Yes. Let's not be prisoners of the past. Very much a Kanye, Candace Owens kind of a message that we've been hearing domestically. Yes. And then it comes it's coming out of Kim's mouth, which blew me away. Because first of all, again, it validates my notion that he's a strong player. He knows what he's doing. Yeah. He understands how to make things work. That was exactly the right thing to say. And then Trump pulls out his video, which says it explicitly too. It said that the history doesn't repeat; it evolves, which is just the best quote ever. Yeah. I want to see that on teacups and stuff.
Yeah, instead of
bumper stickers.
Yeah, instead of Trump saying, I'm going to give you X, Y, and Z, Trump was saying, I'm giving you an opportunity to bring this great prosperity to your people. You're going to be the hero here. And most people would jump at that opportunity. It's like everyone wants to be the hero. It was wonderfully effective in that regard. I couldn't believe how effective it was, in my opinion.
Yeah, and one of the things I talk about is that when people are master persuaders, as I call President Trump, they use their ego as a tool and not as a sort of a description of who they are. And what I mean by that is you see the president will pump up his ego and say, I'm the greatest. When he's campaigning, he wants you to feel things are going well. And he can directly affect things such as the economy. Yeah. So if he said, hey, everything's great, it's great, it's great. But when it came to this situation where the personalities mattered and nuclear war was at risk, you saw that he allowed a video. Obviously, he approved it.
Yes.
He allowed a video in which he was shown as co-equal with Kim as two leaders who could change things, and even showed Kim as being the more important of the two leaders, because he's the one who has to make the big decisions. He has the most to gain. This place history will be most influenced by this. And so the president actually took a slightly subordinate ego position on that video, which was point perfect
And it
for
was
Persuasion.
yeah.
It also supports my idea that he uses his ego as a tool. He could ratchet it up when he needs it, when that makes sense. And he just ratcheted it all the way down for this to allow somebody else to be the star. And that's good persuasion.
And also the very subtle use of pressure consistently through the video, very subtly, it says, you have one chance. This is your one opportunity. It has to happen now. Very, very subtle, but very effective to put that bee in his bonnet, in Kim's bonnet.
Yeah, it's a scarcity principle. Like there's only one of these.
Yeah.
If you miss this chance, you'll never have another chance. So those are exactly the right feelings. And now the reason that I call this persuasive and not manipulative is that the persuasion is just right out there. I mean, it's clear to Kim, to anybody who watches that, oh, you're saying this is a one-time chance to persuade me to move right now. But it's what he wants as well. We presume that they want a good outcome as well. So as long as the persuasion is this overt, meaning there's nothing really hidden in this video, it's obvious technique. It's technique toward a common, better world that everybody involved is going to like. Sorry, my cat is messing with my computer right now.
Give it some lasagna. Scott Adams, it is a huge honor to have you on the show. Scott Adams Says is the Twitter handle. Win Bigly is the book. You're one of the great minds out there right now, and it's been, again, a huge thrill having you here. And thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, and I hope to have you on one of my periscopes sometime soon, if you're willing.
I would be ecstatic.
Great. We'll do that, and sometime soon, because the topic is just perfect right now.
Absolutely. Take care, man.
So thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.